subjects with Senator Rob Portman. He gives us this morning's view from the Hill as a member of the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Committee on Homeland Security. Rob, it is so good to have you back here on America's Forum.
JD, always great to be with you, my friend, and I enjoyed serving with you in the House and always enjoyed hearing you on WLWT-TV in Cincinnati in the 1980s.
Well, as we take that stroll down memory lane, Rob, I appreciate that, and we're going to get to an op-ed column you penned in just a minute, but before we go there, we really want to talk about the budget. You talked about our days on the Ways and Means Committee. I can remember those days in the House. You were our budget representative. In fact, you ended up resigning your seat in the House to go over and work for the White House on the budget under George W. Bush. What do you expect to get from the president, and will there be any agreement on budget priorities from the House and Senate?
Well, I expect to be disappointed based on what the president said in the State of the Union address, or maybe better, JD, what he didn't say. It's amazing that he gave an entire speech and never mentioned the fact that we have an unprecedented $18 trillion national debt, that we're adding another $7 trillion to the debt in the next 10 years, even without any of the new programs that he talked about. So it's almost as if he wants to kind of assume that's not there. It reminds me of some other things he wants to assume are all hunky-dory, you know, in the economy or with regard to terrorism. But it's very real, and I'm afraid that his budget will say, you know, more spending, more taxes, rather than getting at this problem. But look, we're going to wait and see what he says. He's got about 2 weeks to put his budget together and get it to us. I'm on the budget committee also. We've been meeting, trying to anticipate what he might say and starting to put together our own. Because, as you know, the budget resolution in the House and Senate does not have to be signed by the president. So this is something that we can do as Republicans.
An important distinction to make now, Rob, is with Republicans controlling both the Senate and the House, you can move forward in regular order, in stark contrast to what Harry Reid and the Democrats have done in years past.
That's correct. I've been here 4 years in the Senate, and I can't believe there hasn't been a single budget moved in the House and the Senate. In fact, the Senate's only tried to do a budget once in that whole time, and it was a very political document. Now it's our opportunity to say, let's have a budget that actually gets to balance. So we have a balanced budget ahead of us. We can help to get the spending under control and prioritize spending. And let's do it in a way that enables us also to move forward on some important priorities like tax reform and getting the economy moving.
Rob, before we move on to your op-ed piece, there's a development in the House where you and I spent time with our colleague from Ohio, John Boehner. Inviting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to address the Congress, we understand the Speaker did not consult the White House. Now, there are those who say, wait a minute, there's supposed to be a coordination when it comes to foreign policy. Is the Speaker in the clear on this? Your reaction to the invitation and the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu will appear there on Capitol Hill to offer remarks to the Congress?
Well, it's an unusual situation. The Speaker of the House has the opportunity to invite whoever he wants to speak to the chamber. The way our founders set up our government, as you've talked about a lot, JD, is having different branches that had their own priorities and prerogatives. And in this case, the House of Representatives Speaker is the one who decides who gets to speak to the joint session. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I assume that in many times in the past, you know, the Speaker of the House has made that decision. And perhaps an administration has not agreed with it. So he has the opportunity to do that. And I think the White House, you know, ought to embrace it. You know, what's wrong with hearing from the Prime Minister of one of our strongest allies in the world and certainly our strongest ally in the Middle East?
And, of course, now to the reason we wanted you to come on, based on the eloquence of your op-ed. Since yesterday, we saw the March for Life in Washington. In the opinion piece you wrote, you mentioned the Child Custody Protection Act. Could you tell us more about that, Rob?
Yes, and by the way, the march was unbelievable. It's not quite like last year where there was a polar vortex that hit Washington. It was about minus something degrees, and there were thousands of people here, and it was a great turnout. All about people marching for the unborn and ensuring that we do have this clear message being sent all around the country, not just to Washington, that many of us continue to be focused on this issue, very concerned about it. Yesterday I did also introduce legislation. It's called the Child Custody Protection Act, and it basically says, look, if a state like Ohio that has parental involvement requirements, parental notice, for instance, has, and by the way, there are many states in America that have this. In fact, a majority of states now require some parental involvement if a minor child is going to have an abortion. But in those cases, you can't then have a minor drawn across state lines to have an abortion in a state that doesn't have those kinds of parental notifications or involvements, because there are 12 states in the District of Columbia that don't have such laws on the books. So it's a pretty simple piece of legislation. The concern is that in Ohio and other states, we do have children who are transported across state lines for abortions as a way to get around these home state parental involvement requirements. And often this is done under the internet. In other words, there's actually solicitation saying, you can come to our state and have an abortion if you're a minor. So this Child Custody Protection Act would put a stop to this practice. I think it's incredibly important because it simply says parents have a right to be involved in some of their kids' most important decisions, and certainly this is an incredibly important one.
And in the minute that remains, Rob Portman, the fact is, because it is an interstate activity, that is why there needs to be this federal legislation, both legally
Exactly.
and from your vantage point.
Yes, I mean, people can debate on some bills we pass here whether it's a federal priority or not, or whether the federal government should be involved. But even liberal fact checkers have said this is a problem, and it's an interstate problem and has to be addressed by federal legislation.
Fair enough. Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, my former seatmate on the Ways and Means Committee during our days in the House. Sir, we thank you for your time, your update on the prospective budget, your perspective on the invitation to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and of course, news of your op-ed piece, and more importantly, your legislation to help the pro-life movement. You have our thanks. And you get a look at Rob Portman's current assignments in the world's most exclusive club, also known as the U.S. Senate. Technically, I guess there's even a more exclusive club, and that is the presidency. Looking ahead at 2016, we want to know, which Republican candidate would you favor? Would it be Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, somebody else? To vote in our poll, go to newsmax.com/poll.